There is a Sansui 9900 dB sitting in a garage in Pasadena right now. The owner paid $400 for it at an estate sale in 2011, wiped the dust off the faceplate with a soft cloth, plugged it in, and watched every meter needle sweep to life like the thing had simply been waiting. It still works perfectly. The company that built it has not existed in any meaningful sense for 30 years. That gap, between an object so alive and a company so completely gone, is what this story is really about. Because Sansui did not fade. It did not slowly lose market share and quietly retire. It was taken from the inside, by forces that had nothing to do with amplifiers, and most of the people who loved the brand never knew what actually happened until it was already over. So let us go back. Let us go back to Tokyo in the early 1950s, when a man named Kikumi Kikuchi registered a small electronics company and gave it a name that translated, roughly, as Mountain River. Sansui Electric. The name had a kind of serenity to it that would prove quietly ironic given how the company's final chapter would unfold. But in the beginning, there was nothing ironic about any of it. There was only a genuine, almost obsessive commitment to audio engineering at a moment when the world was just beginning to understand what high-fidelity sound could mean inside a home. The post-war Japanese electronics industry moved fast, and Sansui moved with it. By the late 1950s, the company was building tuners and amplifiers that were starting to attract attention outside Japan. American audiophiles were curious. The build quality was serious. The pricing was aggressive. And unlike some competitors who seemed content to copy Western designs and undercut on price, Sansui kept pushing on the engineering itself. They were not assembling products. They were designing them. By the mid-1960s, Sansui had established a foothold in the American market through a distribution arrangement that would prove both essential and, eventually, part of the problem. But we will get to that. For now, understand that Sansui in America was something genuinely exciting. The gear showed up in shops alongside Marantz and McIntosh and Fisher, and it held its own in ways that surprised people who expected Japanese audio to be a lesser alternative. It was not. It was different, and in certain ways it was better. Then came the 1970s, and everything changed. If you want to understand what Sansui became, and why people still talk about it the way they do, you have to spend a moment in the decade that produced the greatest concentration of remarkable consumer audio equipment the world has ever seen. The 1970s were almost improbably good for hi-fi. The baby boom generation was young and employed and spending money on music and the equipment to play it. FM radio had arrived as a serious cultural force. Reel-to-reel tape was sophisticated and accessible. And then, in 1971, quadraphonic sound entered the picture, a 4-channel audio format that promised to put the listener inside the music rather than in front of it. It was ambitious, technically contested, and ultimately a commercial failure. But for Sansui, it was a revelation, because they threw their full engineering weight behind it and built receivers in pursuit of quad that became, as a byproduct, some of the finest stereo machines ever made. The QRX series. The G series. And then, in 1975, the 9900 dB. Say that model number to anyone who grew up around serious audio equipment in the 1970s and watch what happens to their face. The 9900 dB was a receiver, a device combining an FM tuner, a preamplifier, and a stereo power amplifier in a single chassis, and it was, by every reasonable measure, a monument. It weighed over 50 pounds. It produced 110 watts per channel into 8 ohms. The faceplate was a wide aluminum landscape of knobs and meters and backlit controls that glowed amber and green in a darkened room, and if you turned it on at night in a quiet house it filled the space with a kind of warm mechanical presence that is genuinely difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. The tuning dial moved with a resistance that felt engineered. Nothing rattled. Nothing flexed. It was furniture that also happened to play music with the transparency of something twice its price. The 9900 dB retailed for around $750 in 1975. That is equivalent to somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 today, depending on how you calculate it. At that price, it was aspirational. It was the thing you saved for. It was what you put in the living room and showed people when they came over. Sansui had competitors at that level. Pioneer had the QX9999, Marantz had the 2400, but the 9900 dB had something those machines did not always have, which was a kind of wholeness, a sense that every part of it had been thought about together rather than assembled from a catalog of available components. This was Sansui at the absolute apex. And this is the moment, roughly, when the real problem was already growing inside the company, quietly, in a place nobody was watching. Through the 1970s, Sansui sold its products in the United States through a company called Sansui Electronics Corporation of America. This was not uncommon. Many Japanese manufacturers relied on dedicated American subsidiaries or exclusive distributors to handle the complexities of the U.S. market, warehousing, service networks, retailer relationships, marketing. It worked well enough when the relationship was healthy. But the American audio market was about to change in ways that nobody had fully anticipated. The early 1980s brought a convergence of pressures that hit Sansui hard and hit the premium audio category in general. The compact disc arrived and threw the entire industry into uncertainty about what format the future of home listening would use. Consumers hesitated. Big purchases got deferred. Meanwhile, the broader economy went through a serious recession in the early part of the decade, and discretionary spending on expensive electronics, already a considered purchase, pulled back sharply. And then there was the internal fragmentation of the quadraphonic dream, which Sansui had invested so heavily in, that left some of their flagship engineering without a clear consumer application in a purely stereo world. Sansui adapted. They produced excellent equipment through the 1980s. The AU series integrated amplifiers, in particular, developed a devoted following among audiophiles who appreciated their measured, accurate, musical sound. The CA and BA series separates were serious machines. The company had not lost its engineering ability. But the commercial momentum of the 70s, the sense that Sansui was the name you aspired to, had softened. The brand was still respected. It was no longer electric. And then the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, and something went wrong that had nothing to do with amplifiers or tuners or quadraphonic encoding. Here is where the story turns into something that belongs as much in a business crime documentary as in an audio history. Because the thing that finally ended Sansui was not competition. It was not technology. It was not changing consumer taste. It was a holding company called Polly Peck International, and the men who ran it, a businessman named Asal Nadir, whose empire collapsed in one of the largest corporate fraud scandals in British history. Polly Peck International was a UK-based conglomerate that had expanded aggressively through the 1980s into electronics, food, and leisure. Nadir had built it from a small textile business into a company that appeared on the London Stock Exchange with a valuation that seemed extraordinary given how quickly it had grown. In 1989, Polly Peck acquired a controlling interest in Sansui Electric. From Sansui's perspective, at the time, this might have looked like a path to new capital and expanded distribution. It was not. Polly Peck's finances were, investigators would later determine, built substantially on fraud. The company was moving money between subsidiaries in ways designed to inflate profits and disguise losses. When UK authorities began investigating Polly Peck in 1990, the company collapsed almost immediately. It went into administration in October of that year. Nadir fled to northern Cyprus, which does not extradite to the United Kingdom, in 1993 while on bail, and the entire Polly Peck structure came apart in proceedings that went on for years. Sansui was now a subsidiary of a bankrupt fraudulent conglomerate. The American distribution operation, already under strain, fell into the confusion that follows any ownership collapse of that kind. The retail relationships deteriorated. The service network, which had always been a point of pride for Sansui owners who could actually get their machines repaired, lost coherence. New product from Japan could not reliably get to American dealers in any organized way. Dealers stopped ordering. Consumers who would have bought Sansui found something else on the shelf. And here is the thing about a distribution collapse that makes it so devastating for a brand: it is invisible to the people who love the product. If Sansui had made a bad amplifier, audiophiles would have talked about it. There would have been reviews, forum discussions, word of mouth. People would have known. But when the supply chain fails and the ownership structure falls into fraud proceedings and the import relationships go dark, what the person in the store experiences is simply that Sansui stopped showing up. No drama. No announcement. Just an empty space on the shelf where something great used to be. Through the 1990s, what remained of Sansui continued to produce some equipment, primarily for markets outside the United States, under various licensing and ownership arrangements that shifted as the Polly Peck aftermath continued to be sorted through by administrators and courts. The build quality, by many accounts, declined as the engineering culture that had defined the brand dispersed. Some products that carried the Sansui name in the late 90s and into the 2000s had essentially nothing to do with the company that built the 9900 dB. The name survived. The company, in any real sense, did not. This is what audiophiles mean when they talk about a zombie brand. The Sansui name has been licensed in various markets for televisions, small electronics, and entry-level audio gear that would have been unrecognizable to the people who built the G-series receivers. The name is a ghost wearing a different body. It trades on the memory of something real without containing any of what made that thing real. Which brings us back to the garage in Pasadena and the 9900 dB that still works. There are thousands of these machines still out there. They are in closets and storage units and living rooms and vintage audio shops. The capacitors sometimes need to be replaced. That is a standard service job on any receiver of that age. The output transistors occasionally need attention. But the fundamental engineering is so solid, so deliberately constructed, that 50 years on the machines respond to competent service work and simply keep playing music. There is a community of technicians, enthusiasts, and collectors who specifically restore Sansui equipment from this period, and the demand for well-serviced examples has been climbing steadily for the past 15 years. A clean, fully restored 9900 dB today will sell for somewhere between $800 and $1,500 depending on condition and who did the work, which means it has held its real-world value remarkably well for a piece of consumer electronics. That is the practical note to carry away from this story. If you are the kind of person who attends estate sales or browses thrift stores or digs through classified listings, the Sansui receivers from the early to mid-1970s, and the AU series integrated amplifiers, and the TU series tuners that came alongside them, are worth knowing about. They are worth learning to identify. A G77 or a G88 or any variant of the 9000 series, found in working condition, is a machine that will reward you if you treat it properly. Get it serviced. Recap the power supply if nobody has done it already. Then just listen to it. The engineering will do the rest. What got Sansui in the end was not anything that happened in a listening room. It was a British holding company built on numbers that were not real, run by a man who fled justice, collapsing into a legal process that swallowed one of the most genuinely accomplished audio brands the 20th century produced. The amplifiers outlasted the company by decades. They will probably outlast the next several decades too. That is the hi-fi graveyard. A place where the machines keep playing and the companies are gone. If you have ever wondered what happened to Akai, another Japanese